Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Build versus Buy, Finding the Best Path to Network Automation. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Shamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering Network Management at EMA, and Jason Edelman, Founder and CTO at Network to Code. Shamus has more than 16 years of experience in the IT industry as an industry analyst and journalist. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks. Observing how DevOps was radically changing the IT operational models for systems administrators and developers, Jason saw an opportunity to combine technologies from the worlds of DevOps and software development within the networking infrastructure domain to create holistic network automation solutions. Prior to joining Network to Code, Jason spent a career in technical sales at Presidio and Cisco. He is also a co-author of O'Reilly's Network Programmability and Automation book. And before I hand things off to today's speakers, I wanted you to know that Shamus and Jason will be taking your questions at the conclusion of today's event. Feel free to log them anytime though. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA with the on-demand playback, a PDF of the speaker slides, and additional resources. So I hope you'll check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus.
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So the subject of today's webinar is Build versus Buy, choosing a path to network automation. I do a lot of market research where I survey thousands of decision makers and technical personnel in network infrastructure and operations every year, talk to dozens and dozens of them one-on-one, especially in the Fortune 500 space, about what they're doing with networking in general, but network automation is a frequent subject of my research. So my presentation during this session is going to draw on that research and tell you what I'm seeing from the surveys I do and the conversations I have on the subject of network automation and this whole idea of like, do you build it? Do you buy it? What do you do? So the first thing is the whole question of build versus buy. What I find is most organizations are usually doing both because the typical IT organization has multiple tools that they would describe as network automation. And a lot of it is commercial, often coming maybe from an infrastructure vendor that can automate its own switching, routing, and security solutions. But they also usually have multi-vendor networks, so they're looking to not only automate across multi-vendor networks, but they're also looking for capabilities that their commercial solutions can't offer, and that's when they find they need to build as well as buy. So you see here on this chart, like 93% of the IT organizations that we've surveyed tell us that they are developing network automation tools in-house, but 98% tell us that they're using commercial network automation tools. So they're doing both, like almost all of them are doing both. We asked them, why are you doing one or the other, or in this case, both? You see on the left-hand side, drivers of homegrown network automation. First and foremost, they tell us it's a security or compliance requirement. Like, one example of that might be like, well, the network automation stuff that we were looking for was cloud-based. Can't do that. It has to be on-prem. Or, ever since the Sunburst hack with SolarWinds, like I'm really nervous about the software supply chain, and I'd really love just to own my stuff. And actually, that's emboldened here, the 49%, because people who told us they are successful in network automation were more likely to cite security and compliance as a reason why they write their own software or build their own technology for network automation. You see, it's not the only reason. Obviously, a lot of them are also saying to us, well, we want functionality that's aligned to our specific networks. Like we have lots of different topologies in our data center, for instance, and the commercial stuff we looked at couldn't handle that. Closing gaps in commercial automation tools that might be like, just like features that just weren't there in the commercial space that they felt like, well, if that's the way things are, we'll write it ourselves. They want control over the technology roadmap. Like, I don't want a vendor telling me where I'm going to go with my whole network automation strategy. And then less often it's cost savings and culture. Those are pretty tertiary drivers. On the commercial side, security and compliance requirements is also a driver. So it's interesting. Like, there are certain things that where security and compliance drive them towards homegrown, but it also drives them towards commercial. Like, okay, we need, certain like certifications, like ISO, whatever. We don't trust homegrown in this part of our network because we want a commercial solution that's, that's tried and true, whatever, that can ensure that we aren't opening ourselves up to threats. The other drivers that are commercial, the big ones are time to value. Like, we can't wait years to get everything up and running. We need something that's capable of delivering value quickly. Better cross-team visibility into data. So like, a lot of times, like a homegrown network automation tool might not give you good access to data across like different parts of the organization for whatever reason. It might be too brittle and incapable of pivoting in that direction. And then breadth and depth of functionality. Like, I want something that's like features up like as far as the eye can see. Maybe I'm not going to be able to implement them all right away, but I want to know they're there. And then customer support and services, platform requirements like scalability, resilience, and strategic vendor relationships, harkening back to what I said about infrastructure vendors offering their own network automation capabilities. It's like, oh, we're working with this switching vendor, we're using their automation, it works together. We also use them for security and maybe servers. It's like, that drives people to adopt commercial in certain situations. When you're writing your own software, building your own automation, we find that open source technology is a key element. 84% of the homegrown automations projects in our research have some open source components. And actually, people who told us that they were the most successful with their network automation strategies were more likely to be using open source. And on the right, we asked them, what kinds of open source components are in your network automation stack? And you see like Python libraries like Napalm and Namiko are very common. Like, everyone like Python is kind of synonymous with network automation at this point, and all the community libraries that are available that people can leverage and integrate into their own software is very, very popular. You see agent-based configuration management tools is pretty popular. It may not be that they're all using all, not all of them using all three: Puppet, Chef, Salt, and whatever else you might think of. But all of them are using something like that, or at least in some aspect of their network automation strategy. It might be that like some of them are like integrating one of those open source tools with something more network centric to sort of enable orchestration of network services, for instance. Or it may be they're actually running agents on parts of network infrastructure. OpenConfig and Yang, a couple of very network modeling centric technologies, are also somewhat popular. And then you see Ansible is in one of 4 projects right now. That might be open source. Some of them might actually be using Red Hat specifically as a vendor, but still we consider it open source. So those are all. Those are what we're seeing right now. Here's some people that I've talked to over the last couple of years. Here's a network architect at a Fortune 100 retailer talking about build versus buy. He said that the sheer size of his operations tended to max out the capabilities of all of the network infrastructure vendors that he worked with. Like, he'd want to automate his data center. His switching vendor couldn't handle what he was asking for. Firewalls also, like he was talking about firewalls and being able to manage like policies across all his firewalls. His firewall vendor, his firewall automation vendors just couldn't handle it. He says, we scale out to such a huge number of configurations, kind of exceeded the capabilities. So yeah, we needed to write something ourselves. Network engineer at a Fortune 500 cloud provider told us that all of his tools are developed internally, because a few years ago when he was looking at a commercial option, he found that they didn't offer what he needed at the time. He was talking about how he had many different types of designs and topologies in his network. Like each data center was kind of a unicorn. And he couldn't find that a commercial tool that could address all of it. So he started writing his own solution, just adding features over time. And he told me, actually, like if he could, he'd love to pivot back to a commercial. But at this point, like things are working well for him. And he's going to continue on that journey. And then a network automation engineer at a Fortune 500 retailer, so a slightly smaller retailer than the one above. He said he's always found that one solution cannot fit everyone's needs. When it comes to commercial solutions, they'll automate everything to maximize. They'll say they automate everything to maximize your potential ROI, but it's just not possible. Like he's finding that people just overpromise and don't deliver. And so he finds it safer to go and write his own stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason now for his perspective.
All right, great. Thanks, Shamus. And so, yeah, Shamus alluded to, I'll give my perspective. And really, this is what we're seeing at Networks of Code day to day. Very much a services consulting business, helping lots of enterprises really take that leap into network automation. And so, we've seen a lot of projects where clients are just starting out, or others that are, we're involved to help accelerate the journey. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is sort of a good roll up and a good summary of what we're seeing in the market. And so I love the topic of build versus buy. I always think it's catchy, and it's a little bit of even clickbait, trying to look at what strategy should we employ, a build versus buy. I'm going to change things up and talk workflows first. And I truly believe workflows are the place to start. And even starting with, what do I mean when I say the word workflow? The term itself isn't really pervasive yet across the industry. And so I want to ask, in terms of, what is your team or your organization doing day to day? You can kind of go to your ITSM or ITOM, look at, common operational tasks and stack rank them, right? Which ones are happening the most common? When you think about it like that, it's really thinking about it in the most simplistic manner, in the sense of what the team and organization is doing every day. And even in conversations, we kind of see what's on the left-hand side of this slide. It's the perception of when you get the answer from a network engineer, if it's a campus, WAN, data center, it doesn't really matter the domain. Typically, it's in a phrase of, 2 to 5 words, right? Because it's so terse and succinct, it seems like it's just that simple to go do, that portion or that one task. But the reality is, take one step back around what does it mean then to look at it from a workflow perspective? This is where it includes everything start to finish. You can see some of the bullets here on the right hand side, but gathering the data, maybe issuing maybe pre-checks and post-checks, or the definition of what are the pre-checks for a given change. Then doing things like the rollbacks, right? If things fail, maybe if there's a post-check failure, you want to do an automated rollback. This is the reality, in the sense that we're often thinking about these really quick workflows or quick tasks, but the reality is it's these more robust workflows. I remember, talking to a client once, just trying to dissect the day to day, right? A lot of this is an analysis, talking to customers and organizations, and you see these responses, and when you kind of peel back the onion a bit, it might take 30 minutes or 2 hours. You really try and understand all aspects of a given workflow. So I think about it around we're teeing it off talking about build versus buy, and so why do I choose to start with workflows? And I'd probably sum it up with you need to know what you're trying to automate. It's full stop before there's that decision or the thought around even build versus buy. So the one phrase that I really like is, if you can't document it, can you automate it, or should you be automating it? And so it's really to take that leap and think about workflows, document workflows. Once you understand them, then we can really do a better analysis of maybe the building or the buying or consuming open source for that matter from a tooling perspective. We can go to the next slide. Another topic, that I love talking about is extensibility. Again, on network to code, if my estimation is right, I'm going to guess, over the past several years, and maybe in every project, there was some level of code. And again, it could be 1 line, 5 lines, or it could be 5,000 lines of code written. It's all gonna matter for size, scale, type of solution, whatever is needed to really get that deployment right off the ground. And what I mean by that is when a team or an organization is gonna get engaged, roll up their sleeves to get something into production, there's usually and operationalize it, there's some level of integration or glue that has to happen. And that leads to simplification, abstraction. There's some level of code that gets written to be able to do it, to really and tailor that deployment. And I'll give an example, even mentioning Ansible, or Shamus mentioned Ansible, and 1 of 4 respondents from the survey. What we're seeing, it's still one of the de facto tools in network automation, right? It really has done well. And I think back over the last several years of why that is, or where it even emerged, like going back to even 2014, 15, 16, in the early days, Ansible didn't even support networking. It was the open source nature and the community pull that kind of led it down the networking path. So it was due to the extensibility of Ansible that kind of let the consumers take it where there was a need, and there was a clear need in the network automation market. So Ansible, super low barrier to entry is one example. You can download it, get it installed, start doing things within a few minutes, maybe a bit more, right? Based on skills, of course. And then there comes a time, right? Getting into production, right? It's going to take days to weeks to months based on org size and scale. And even there's going to be maybe 5 lines of Python. It could be a custom module, could be a custom filter, whatever it might mean. And I want to highlight that as it's not a bad thing, right? There's got to be a tailored implementation. It's not a bad thing. Like, it's actually an amazing thing, and it showcases the extensibility, because I'll mention this a few times probably today, that historically, when there was a gap in a tool, right, it just led to deploying another tool, right? Free or free open source or commercial. And so having things be tailored to fit the operational model is always a big value add. For other examples, think about consuming APIs. A lot of vendors these days want to tout an API. Could be of a router or switch, could be an automation tool. Those APIs are meant to be consumed, and it might mean, again, gluing 1 or more tools together, right, with some level of code or extensibility. Even thinking about migrating vendors, changing hardware platforms, I really think through how that could look in your organization when you think about the unknown or the direction of the network platforms across the data center, campus, and WAN. And the whole goal is to really keep in mind if another new feature is needed, if a new device type is needed, if we need to add a governance rule, right? Again, security requirement that comes up. Should that be a net new tool, or should there be enough extensibility in a platform to allow you to get where you need to go? I'll highlight the picture here really quick on the right. There's 3 rectangles in red, kind of going left to right. I'll just highlight this. Hard to make out maybe in the screenshot, but on the left there's this rectangle of a home screen of an open source project called Not About That we use quite a bit at Network to Code. And this is sort of an extensible add-on that injected content to the homepage of a tool, which is really good in terms of showcasing the right data for the right user inside of a product in the tool. But I'll say the next one over, there's this devices drop down. Again, just think about any inventory system, right? You can mention any tool. Just imagine being able to inject a new menu item. So here, as an example, devices, device roles, and platforms, all these things are kind of there out of the box. But controllers, and we all know SDN controllers are very top of mind and becoming more and more of the de facto standard for next-gen architectures in the networking space. And so this is an extensible platform that allows users to be able to inject menu items or content where it makes sense in current dropdowns, and even creating brand new dropdowns like in the top right golden config, right? It's not there, quote unquote, out of the box, but through another open source extension, it allows users to customize that. So here it's kind of highlighting both. Clearly, there would need to be code written to be able to extend the platform. But beautiful thing is once it's done, then users who don't have to worry about the code can then consume the platform in the UI, kind of get the best of both worlds there. And it's overall, I'll just highlight one more time. I think back around the last 15, 20 years, even in my career, prior jobs, doing things like hardware bills of materials and bombs and tech refreshes and all these things like that, that would sometimes also have network management tied to it. And when there was budget cuts or just a change in direction or concern on the tools, network management was always the first thing to go. And for one, it's one of the reasons we are where we are. I think in the industry, but I always think around we don't want to end up with what I'll refer to as the network management of yesterday, right? We want to do better and have the automation for tomorrow, and extensibility truly is key to that. We can go to the next slide. I'll keep this one a bit shorter, and based on experience, right? We really never see 0% or 100% open source, right? Kind of have these throttles or gauges up top. The same would be true for commercial tools. And however, when I think about some of the industry headlines, and this was put together a while back, just showcasing a lot of the trends from OEMs, tool vendors, and so forth, really showcasing the integrations they have within the open source space and the DevOps space, and so forth. So I always ask myself, why is that, right? Just think about the integrations and the advertisements and showcasing, hey, our tool integrates with Ansible or integrates with Nornir, a Python-based automation framework, and it integrates with an Autobot. This is great, and I think it's not trying to dismiss commercial tooling. So they're showcasing the integrations. I always go back to looking at what is the reality in terms of what's driving the change, and to me, this is more evident that sort of the workflow based, the open source based, net DevOps is continuously driving that change across the industry. Go back to you, Shamus.
All right, Jason, thanks. So diving into like one key component of build versus buy, and getting started, like one thing we find is data is essential to network automation success. Like you gotta have a good approach to data, and the data you use to plan and implement a change and verify a change is essential to successful automations. And that's people often talk about that at a conceptual level as a source of truth or sources of truth. What is a network source of truth? Everyone's gonna, you Google it, you get like 30 variations on a theme on the first page of results, but it's about creating sort of an authoritative repository of network data. The data that an engineer or an admin is going to gather in order to make a change that conforms with your overall intent for the network. It can be things like golden configurations that your engineering team has created, IP address space, DNS records, inventory data will be very important. Like does the hardware like actually support the golden configs that we want to implement in this part of the network? And security policies is also important. It can be centralized or federated. You might have like a commercial tool that says we have a source of truth that's going to contain everything you need in order to run automation. But in reality, you might find it's actually a federated thing where you pull in data from multiple sources. it integrates with or it's native to your automation tool. And it's, as I said, it's supposed to provide all the data needed to implement an automated change that, doesn't, open up a security vulnerability or bring down the network or throttle traffic. A key issue we see is, can a source of truth automatically gather all the data you need? So it's like there, you don't have to go into CLI to do a show command or something, pull data. You don't have to go into an Excel spreadsheet and scroll to what it is that you need to plug into your automation tool to complete the task you're trying to implement. 52% of network teams that we have surveyed tell us they've fully automated data gathering via source of truth. Like, we've got things set up in such a way that we have a centralized repository that may be integrated with various systems of record, like IP address management, device inventory management, CMDB, whatever. And it gathers this data automatically and presents it to the tool's user, and they can, drag and drop or whatever, and get the automation implemented. Almost 27% say our staff has to gather pretty much all this data manually from multiple systems of record. They're going into IPAM, they're going to an Excel spreadsheet, they're going into CMDB and manually pulling all this stuff into automation, pushing a change. And then a little over 21% say it's a combination of both. Like, we've got some stuff that's in a source of truth, but still our admins, our engineers are having to go somewhere to pull something to close the loop on automation. Among those people say that at least some of this gathering of data is manual. 49% of them told us that manual gathering of data undermines their network automation strategy. It's causing pain. And what are those pain points? Number one, it takes too long to gather the data. 56% say that it's slowing down our velocity. We implemented network automation so that, like, we can speed up moves, adds, and changes. We can quickly revert back to the previous state if something goes wrong. And we promised that the network would no longer slow down service delivery and things like that. But the data gathering is this piece that we overlooked that's slowing us down, still taking us hours to make certain changes. Lack of change visibility and verification, like you can't sort of coordinate intent and state. Like, okay, I've entered all data in to push my intent for the network change into automation, but in order to verify that my change was good, now I've got to go and manually check things and say, okay, like, I've talked to guys who are like, yeah, we have an automation tool. I push a change, and then I know if it was a good change because no ticket comes in. Like, no one's screaming. So it was good. Of course, even then it's like, oh, well, a month later you realize it wasn't good. Like, it was just like a time bomb or something. So not great. Security vulnerabilities, 41% say that this, manual data gathering is a source of potential human error. Even if, like, network automation is supposedly like removing certain risks of errors, if you're cutting and pasting data, like, if you make some sort of mistake in that process, you're still introducing errors into your network automation pipeline, and those errors can open up security vulnerabilities. And it could also lead to performance problems. as 35% of them said here, and downtime. Here's some people I've talked to about this subject. A net DevOps engineer from a European government agency, I think the UK. Our data gathering is somewhat manual. We have a DDI tool, so basically he's going as like IPAM, DNS, whatever, but it's not fit for purpose. It's always out of date. Our engineers revert to using spreadsheets for network automation. Like I was just talking to someone the other day who's like, our IPAM, a different person on our IPAM solution is solid, but like people are still like making changes to IP address space and not, entering it into the IPAM tool. So we got like this drift because our IPAM solution is not discovering or detecting changes like it should. It's like a feature gap or whatever. So yeah. And also like you talk to them like, hey, are you integrating your IPAM solution with your network automation pipeline? No, our IPAM tool has terrible APIs. I can't get that done. Network engineer of the Fortune 500 manufacturer. Our network automation tool holds all the data. It takes a snapshot of switches every time you make a change. So that guy's feeling pretty good, right? The question is like, is its snapshot in agreement with other systems of record? Like he's a Fortune 500 company. His company probably has a CMDB system. There might be people going to CMDB and saying is this our source of truth about the network? Because they don't have access to whatever he's using, right? So think about like a security team who's trying to like implement something, maybe making changes to policy, global policy, and they want to know something about the network. They might not go to what he's got, right? So there's a problem. Network engineer with a $3 billion biotech company says, today our data gathering is manual. In an ideal world, it would be a combination of automated and manual tasks. Automated for standard tasks and manual for more advanced tasks that need more complex executions, which kind of reminds me of what Jason was saying in one of his first slides, like automating workflows, but actually like, perception versus reality. Like I remember talking to another person who described himself as a network automation engineer at a very large research university, who told me that his job was to talk to network engineers and ask them like, what are the tasks that you do that are highly repetitive? And then he would write like a single use script for things like individual tasks within a workflow. And so like there was no coordination of a workflow for him. And maybe he had scripts that could automatically pull data for a user, like, oh, I can get this piece of data for this really simple task, but if I want to gather all this data for like a major workflow, I'm going to get bogged down in a mix of like, I'm going to run this script to get that into onto my desktop, and I'm going to just go into this Excel spreadsheet on my own to do this. It gets pretty complex. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Jason now for his perspective on sources of truth.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Shamus. Yeah, the one comment I'll make on one of the measurables you had on the previous slide was the 56% takes too long to gather data. And I guess my take is the other half of that, approximately 44%, is they're either not being truthful or they're okay with mediocrity. But the truth is, in terms of gathering data is critical, right, on this journey for network automation. So that said, yeah, for this slide, I'm going to start back at the top and really kind of level set in terminology. That's really the goal here. And Shamus introduced source of truth, and I really think it's important to start with the definition of the intended state. I kind of get to the pictures, on the right in a few. I kind of always go back to, what we all know and have seen in our careers. And that is over the past couple of decades, there's been lots of networking devices, and the only known state is that of the device, right? An engineer and operator logs into a device, you see a configuration, and that's the state, right? We can call that, whatever name we want to give it, but that's the actual state of the device. And that's really, the only thing that we had to really, look at. It wasn't necessarily, well, is it the right configuration? Is a portion of it right? Is a portion of it wrong? This leads to other discussions around maybe deploying yet another, set or series of tools to do some of those checks. But from a configuration perspective, it's how do we know if that's the right configuration, that should be on the device. If you're checking the device, right, you're checking the actual configuration, you're not checking the intended configuration, which is part of really understanding that approach of network source of truth, right? So now when we look at imagine building a house, could be from scratch, it could be putting on a new addition, right? It's just you think about doing these things, maybe have all the right parts, but it's just without knowing the intended state, it would be near impossible to really get through it. And so maybe end up with a house without a roof, which won't work today with where I am. I'll tell you that pretty well over here. But all right, we can go on to the next slide. So trying to summarize even a lot of what Shamus has said too, he mentioned in his interviews, people mentioning spreadsheets and IPAMs and so on. And so this is a good high level conceptual story to be aware of. But again, over the past several years and beyond, there's been lots of everything from Excel spreadsheets, next generation Google spreadsheets, Notepad files, Word documents. All of this has some level of data used for the network in some fashion, right? And it could be portions of the network, and it could be different teams use different files. It could be policies, right? It could be maybe there's a spreadsheet for tracking BGP routing information or circuits. It could be a variety of things, but in general, each of these pieces of data is usually analyzed and inspected in order to pull the right data to make a given change or to do a certain deployment within any part of the network. And so I would say, phase one in general, we think about data, it really is the migration of spreadsheets, and we'll include sort of text files and Word docs in this. And what we're seeing, I guess, from our perspective is, phase one is usually that leap into YAML, right? It's kind of that step into structured data. Some might use JSON or YAML, other file formats, and that's okay. And I think it's a great thing, right? If you're looking at YAML files and making that leap into YAML files, it probably means you're either directly or indirectly defining the intended state of the network. Because I would say, by and large, those that are using YAML of some fashion are probably fetching that data from a tool. Again, it could be homegrown, Netmiko, Nornir, scripts. It could be Ansible playbooks. It doesn't really matter what it is, but then there's some level of fetching that data right into YAML. And then once you pull that data, you would need to generate a configuration file, prepare an API call with that data to be made, and then automate the device. I would say, however, there's that the growth and the evolution that we're seeing is that it also exists and good to be aware of, in the sense that you go down this path of YAML, you start doing more definition of what the intended state should be, probably automating more, right, with the more YAML that exists. But if we kind of go back to the process from an org perspective, or organization, large enterprises, it means if you're deploying YAML files, they should be in some sort of Git repo, right? Could be a new skill. If you're using a new Git repo, then there's probably some level of testing that is desired or warranted in there that leads to building out a pipeline, a CI pipeline, to make sure there's good data, quality data and just things are the way they need to be. So really quickly, it goes from YAML to Git to CI pipelines to just certifying the data is good, and then trying to figure out how do you catch good YAML, wrong object was changed, right? There's a lot of things to be able to talk through there. Then you kind of get to the point of when there's hundreds or thousands of YAML files, or maybe even hundreds or thousands of lines in a single YAML file, right? There's just a lot of things to consider. And we have this like next phase of really taking a step back and doing the analysis of what data makes sense to maybe persist or remain in YAML versus what data makes sense to have in a quote unquote real source of truth or a database for that matter. And so the analysis could be on the data itself, right? In terms of, well, I'll say skills first, and I mentioned it already. It could be skills, right? In terms of skills development, right? Everything in YAML or Git, for one, I think there's in a large enterprise just more and more skills to make pervasive, to be able to do that. Then there's also, well, there's requirements to potentially either A, have programmatic access to the data, right? How would we make an API call to change that data and therefore change something in the network? Then there's also the reality of, in large organizations, being able to have a variety of teams to be able to update and change the data. So having something that isn't as low level as Git is also extremely important. So when you think about inventory, firewall policies, routing data, interfaces, VLAN, AAA, SNMP, all these data, data constructs, it's really kind of one at a time, really looking at where does it make sense to have this data be stored and have that data be the authoritative source or system of record for that piece, and ultimately together collectively, creating a source of truth for the network. We can go to the next slide. And this one is really bringing it together visually. It kind of, starting at the left, kind of really showcases maybe where we are today. Kind of talk about, spreadsheets from just where we are today with inventory or policies, BGP. But this is more network designs of, what is the definition of a design in an enterprise. You can have t-shirt size deployments, right? The small, medium, large. Maybe it's a small site. Maybe that's a single router, dual router, 1 or 2 circuits each. Then there's the medium site, dual router, HA, 2 circuits each, extra, large, and so forth. And really, the definition of designs, within an enterprise, then you kind of be able to codify that design or codify that design in the sense that how could we easily deploy a new device, deploy a new site, maybe deploy a new closet, deploy a new rack, generate the right data to be able to do that, and then feed that data to the automation tooling. It's kind of what we're seeing from the first blue arrow to the second blue arrow there, and really thinking about all of those things that we have, the network designs, standard operating procedures, being able to essentially codify both of those from a data perspective as well as from an automation perspective, and then ultimately along the way, the whole goal is to have data to be stored, in that vendor neutral manner. Again, earlier Shamus talked about things like OpenConfig and Yang. I would say in enterprise, we're as a company, we're not seeing a huge adoption in sort of the Yang models, but what we are seeing is sort of the neutral data models to be able to simplify that data abstraction, right, to drive multi-vendor network automation, ultimately creating this concept of data-driven network automation. And we can go to the next slide. And so this is really a kind of build out from the previous slide, that we kind of talked through in the build versus buy and just introduced workflows. Here we had the perception, right, that really terse task that's really a more robust workflow, which is reality. Then when we kind of go through these bullets of preparing for a change and getting ready for a change, then we have the data that's needed to do it. That includes the data for the actual change itself. It could include which commands do you want to run, what is the output of the command expected, all of these things that are the intended state to really operationalize the network. And all of these data points right, should have an authoritative source or a source of truth to be able to really have data start to drive automation, really creating what we call data-driven network automation. And that's it for this slide, Shamus.
Okay. All right. One last thing from me and ultimately Jason is just whether you're building or buying or both, you got to assemble a team that can do this, whether, implement an automation strategy and make sure it's used properly and maintained properly. But finding the right people can be painful. I surveyed 400 NetOps people last year, said, hey, how easy or difficult is it for you to hire and retain people that are skilled networking experts? And only 13% said easy, no problems. The rest are pulling their hair out to one degree or another. Some of them are bald, some of them were not quite bald yet, just pulling the hairline right here. The most difficult skills to find were security, like network security skills and network automation skills. Network architect from a Fortune 100 retailer. There are very few people who can put networking into code. That's key to think about. Networking guys know the network really well, but we're not Python programmers, we're scripters, for instance. The programmers are great at coding, they don't know networking at all. Sometimes when I talk to people about how they're putting together network automation teams, they're getting coders and they're getting network engineers and asking them to work together, but do they know how to talk to each other? Do they know how to look at each other's work? Network engineer at a Fortune 100 manufacturer says, when the automation tool comes in, you need an expert to hand off the tool versus just telling people to start using it. So like you've built everything, whether you've built or bought, you've got this thing in place, ready to transform operations. Are people going to use it? Like you need someone who knows the solution to say, hey, this is what you can do with this. And this is why you don't want to continue diving in a CLI every time you want to make a change, right? So how do you solve the skills gap? Based on what I hear from people, like you hire people, not skills, because if you're holding out for a certain skill set, like you're not going to find it often. Instead, hire smart people. Look for potential inside your organization and invest in training, whether it's new hires or the people in place, like train them, convince them that like this is how they further their career. Build a lab and let people play, gain experience. One of the best ways to like implement network automation strategy is to get a proof of concept in place and let people use it and be like, oh, this tool's pretty cool, but I wish it did this. And encourage collaboration. If you are going to pull developers, network engineers, and ask them to build something together, like encourage collaboration, and that's going to mean training. That's going to mean giving them time to figure things out. Don't rush them. This network engineer, Fortune 100 manufacturer, says, in the beginning, automation was sort of a threat to my job, but I saw an opportunity. So I started learning Python, Perl, JSON. I updated my skill set instead of staying inside my existing skill set and worrying about my job. It's a lesson I think everyone can learn from. And then a NetOps director at a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical said, I look for potential. We don't hire for top tier skills. We're just looking for a general networking skill set. He's like, I'm interviewing someone. I say, oh, I see on your resume that you did this, you worked with this. Could you describe to me like how it worked and how you worked with it and like how you brought value while working on this? And he said, if that person can articulate like a very basic thing that's technical, but like a tier 1 skill in a way that tells him this person is smart and technically capable, then I know I can train them on this other thing. And if I invest in them, and I'm hiring good people, not skills, basically. So back to you, Jason.
Great, thanks. Yeah, on the last comment, yeah, I agree. I think in general, in terms of mapping networking skills into automation, really starting with being able to dissect and reverse engineer a workflow is a great start. Just understanding, modular thinking and design thinking, breaking down, something that, a person that realizes a task is 20 or 30 steps is going to do really well in the automation space versus just like worried about like the portion of it that's touching a networking device. So yeah, so on this slide, this is again what we see at Network to Code. This is a slide that kind of portrays what we see as the progression of like job roles and titles in the network automation space, right? A lot of this is going to depend based on size of organization, but I'll just call out, looking at the visual, we have the network engineer, doesn't do it justice, right, on the networking skill set. Clearly, these are the experts today. But I think the main point that I want to talk about is the evolution of the de facto network engineer is now a network development engineer, which is the network engineer traditional skill set. You have to be able to maintain that, the routing, switching, wireless, security, whatever the domain it's in. But then you kind of add in, some of these, I would say, foundational skills for automation, right? A little bit of Git, a little bit of Linux, right? Maybe a little bit of Jinja templating, or maybe a little bit of Python, right? There's some of these skills that are going to round out the engineer to be able to consume network automation and make some small updates along the way. Then you kind of go one level deeper in automation skills. We have the NAE, or network automation engineer, that is going to spend a lot of their time building workflows. And again, these don't have to be even like full dedicated titles per se, but it's recognizing the difference of like consuming automation, building automation. One level deeper there is, if organizations are truly going that, custom route, which again, if it makes sense, it makes sense, then you might even need some more of the, traditional software engineers if you're kind of building tools from scratch. And then I'll point out one more, which I do believe, we see is one of the biggest gaps in the market, is network automation architects. So when you start to, build the vision, you start to talk about maybe closed loop systems, managing multiple disparate data sources, automation, orchestration, all these areas, and knowing how to do that within an enterprise, right? It does take somebody with that architecture skill around automation to really make that happen. And so two more points here that I'll make is, around the bullets, it's kind of the evolution of automation. People might spin out teams and build teams early on, but, when we kind of get past sort of maybe, where we were, historically as an industry into where we are now, there's definitely the emergence of sort of that platform team, somebody who's going to have the architecture and the oversight of understanding how all the things are going to work together to really achieve the cross-domain, multi-domain network automation. And you kind of have the consumers of it, and consumers here could mean the development engineers or the NAEs across their individual organizations, right? Security, LAN, WAN, data center, and so forth. And each of those departments can then sort of contribute back to the platform to automate their workflows. We can go to the next slide. I'll be quick on the final two. This next one is sort of a high-level glance of how we look at some mapping roles to skills. Again, I talked through a little bit of this verbally on the last slide. A lot of this is a bit more, technical, but I would say the one takeaway I would say is, as you think about roles in the organization, really think about the skills that engineers should have, right? I would say it's not as, black or white around, hey, just network automation skills. So you can kind of peel back the onion, just like in networking, there's progression and growth. The same thing is true within the network automation space as well. And we can go to the next one. One step further, right, this kind of continues to build on the previous slides. Objectives, I think there's a lot of learning, right, to grow skill sets. And oftentimes we talk about maybe even skills and tools. Again, we had roles in the previous two slides, but objectives, I think it's really important to kind of start with where you want to end up. What is it? Is it config compliance? Is it firewall rule automation? And then, peel back each one to look at how there could be a plan and a progression built out to showcase how an organization could get there with an architecture and a solution, and then mapping it back to individual learning plans. One thing I'll point out, I was going to state it on the first point in response to some of Shamus's slides, it's really investing in your people. I think, we've seen so many things over the years in the sense that even like, hey, we're going to allocate 5% of these people's time to our network automation. It's not going to help, right? If you're looking at 5%, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week, right? You're gonna be going for a really long time. And so it's really about, I would say, from a leadership perspective, you really have to kind of show commitment, and then individually you got to be passionate about learning it, and then finding out what can work within the organization. But the partial investment of time really doesn't necessarily help in the overall acceleration of the journey, the value that it could have. It's potentially saving millions of dollars a year financially, and making the network a bit more resilient and predictable along the way as well. That's it, Shamus, on my side.
All right, cool. As we can learn more about network to code, Jason's company. I'm going to turn it over to Raleigh. Do we have time for questions, Raleigh?
Yes, I think I'll ask each of you one question.
Okay.
And as a reminder, I will be sending the audience this information so you can learn more about network to code. Starting with you, Jason, how long should it take to stand up and roll out network automation in a medium to large enterprise?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just in the interest of time, I'll probably keep this a bit succinct, even looking at like the past 3 slides of the progression of the skills. But especially in large enterprises, I would say, it's definitely not, I would, weeks to, to months to be able to get to a portion that's being able to really showcase the impact in terms of the journey itself. Yeah, look, I think it's anywhere from a 1 to a 3-year journey, based on what end state is in mind. And that's really the key. We can talk about fully automated networks that, might be more of a myth than reality. And it's really starting, where do you want to end up? Let's reverse engineer it. But, on average, I'd probably say large enterprise, you should assume there's a lot of work to be had to be able to build out the overall strategy, document the workflows, do the proper planning, build the backlogs, be able to do the analysis of what makes sense tool-wise, and then start that journey along the way.
Thanks, Jason. The next question, Shamus, I'll start with you, and Jason, if you want to add anything, feel free. It is, kindly advise who we can start the bridging of skills of the current network engineers to start using the automation tools. What are your thoughts on that question, Shamus?
How to let's read that question. I think he's got a typo in there. How can we start bridging skills current network engineers to start using them? Okay. So I think Jason said it earlier, like, it's not invest in people, not tools. And also it's not just training. I think IT leadership should, and middle management should set and enforce an agenda, and give people time to execute on that agenda. Yes, you can train people, but you also have to give them practical experience, and that means allowing them to work, setting up a lab, doing proofs of concept with different solutions, and letting them experiment and gain some sort of facility with the tools that you may end up building or buying. You got to give people a lot of times when people are like doing a project like this, like they're just trying to get it done as quickly as possible to start getting a return on investment, getting quick time to value, and they don't give people the time to really implement something, to learn something comprehensively. It's like I'm always hearing, like, we bought something or we built something, we had 100, we got to 20% of what we wanted to do and we moved on to the next thing. Like, you gotta, when you're training, when you're getting your people up to speed on where you want to go with network automation, you got to let them get to 100%. So I'll hand it to Jason if he has anything to add.
No, look, I don't want to make this a commercial about us as a business. I'll kind of call out other ways to get started. Pluralsight has some good options. There's free Python classes. Kirk Byer is really well known in the community. I'll give a shout again as a co-author of a book. If you want to email this email address in the form, I'll do what I can to get you a copy, no cost, right? I think hopefully we'll have a second edition out in the next few months. But look, I think we have to do what we can to support each other on this journey. And again, a book, there's so many skills that continue to help every day. But I think the fundamental skills of that NDE role of the Linux and the fundamentals of Jinja and Python and YAML and JSON make a lot of sense. So email in. I'll do what I can. And if shipping costs aren't outrageous, we'll make sure we can get you get you a book to start your journey if you haven't started yet.
Fantastic. And I have that contact information as well, Jason. So thank you for that offer. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I hope you'll check out the email that will be coming from EMA that will include resources from today's event. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.